Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So we're here in the library of Worcester College, Oxford, and we're here to discuss the second part of our discussion, which is centred on paintings from the Sikh tradition. And we're here with two wonderful experts. We've got Davinder Singh Toor, who you will all know from the first part of the discussion, and just from fame generally, who is a wonderful collector of Sikh art. He's done a great deal to make his collections very accessible to, you can say, the general Sangat and just the general populace at large. And many of his paintings, as you would have heard from the last podcast, have many connections to Asthans, which we discussed already. Our second contributor to today is Dr. Resham Singh. So Dr. Resham Singh, is a doctor by training, but he's also trained in many other forms of Vidya as well, including Gurmat Sangeet, and most recently he's developed a great interest in paintings from the Sikh tradition, and along with myself is one of the founding trustees of Virasati Asthans Seva, a charity which is essentially fundraising for the conservation of Asthans, mainly from the Sikh tradition. There are two Asthans which we are currently fundraising for. The first of which is Haveli Kabir Singh Ji in Kaithal, Haryana, and that has been covered in a separate podcast we did with Jawala Singh Ji. And the second Asthan which we're involved in fundraising for is Gurdwara Baba Bikrama Singh Bedi, a name which may not be familiar to everyone's ears, but the name of whose father will be familiar to many, many more. So Baba Sahib Singh Bedi, who was discussed in the first podcast, where we covered a number of key paintings showing Baba Sahib Singh Bedi and drawing connections between the paintings, including one of them, which is a very important painting in the collection of Davinder Singh Toor, which has many resemblances artistically, stylistically, thematically with some of the wall paintings which are in the Gurdwara Baba Bikrama Singh Bedi, who was the son of Baba Sahib Singh Bedi. So we've got this father and son connection there, but Baba Sahib Singh Bedi, who we spoke of in the last discussion, you can say he gave birth to a number of different lineages. One lineage was of his own sort of, you can say, his physical descendants, but then there was also his spiritual descendants. What in traditional sort of, you can say, Hindi or Punjabi, you have this bindi aulad, which is your offspring physically or biologically, and then there is this nadi aulad, if I'm correct in sort of drawing on this interpretation, that there were other lineages, and I emphasize the plural because there are many traditions and sampradayas from the Sikh parampara have some connection to Baba Sahib Singh Bedi. So as we'll get to Baba Bikrama Singh Bedi probably in the second portion of our discussion, we want to first look at the spiritual line which grew out from Baba Sahib Singh Bedi, and one of the main figures we want to start off our discussion today is Baba Bir Singh, or famously Baba Bir Singh Ji of Naurangabad. Resham Singh Ji, would you be able to give listeners just an initial introduction to who was Baba Bir Singh? Why are we talking about him in connection to Baba Sahib Singh Bedi?
Yeah, no, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I think you very beautifully illustrated how in our sort of Indic tradition we do have not just familial lineages, but we have spiritual lineages, and often the spiritual lineage carries far more importance, and we see that in our own tradition with the 10 Guru Sahibs, that things were not hereditary and it was only on a merit basis that the Guruship passed, and that tradition continues throughout. And so what's interesting about the whole Bedi tradition, given that they are Guru Nanak Dev Ji's direct descendants, is that they also formed sort of this epicenter of many different traditions offshooting. So you will find the Sevapanthi tradition very heavily influenced by Baba Sahib Singh. Many Sevapanthi saints going to Baba Sahib Singh, getting instruction in how to practice. You get Nirmale sants like Thakur Bhai Dayal Singh, very famous Nirmala of Amritsar, who would constantly go for darshan or meetings with Baba Bir Singh or Baba Sahib Singh. You have the Bedis themselves as a family tradition, and then you also get the Akalis or the Nihangs also coming to Baba Sahib Singh. So as a figure, he's very unifying. What's interesting about the Bedi Asthan, so it's Gurdwara Baba Bikrama Singh Bedi. What's interesting is that in some of the paintings which we'll see alongside the video is that Baba Bir Singh features very heavily. So that lends credence to this idea that spiritual lineages carry as much, if not more, weight than just bloodlines. Now, Baba Bir Singh was a very sort of towering figure in this sort of mid to late Sikh Raj period. Babaji was born in 1825 Bikrami, so that's 1768 in the Common Era calendar. He was born to a man named Seva Singh, and his mother was called Daya Kaur, in a village called Gagobua. Babaji's father was involved in the army of Sham Singh Atariwala and was a military man. He died when Baba Bir Singh was only 16 years old in a military campaign. So the first military campaign that was launched in Multan, which was largely a sort of Islamic area under Afghan type rule. In the first sort of war there, which the Sikhs didn't really win, Babaji's father passes away. Mm-hmm. We find references in the early histories that Babaji was well educated in the Pind Gurdwara in his childhood, learning all the traditional Vidya. If you want to have an insight even to how far that type of learning persisted even into the colonial period, then you can look at G.W. Littner's work on the education of indigenous peoples in Punjab. And in there he actually documents a whole curriculum that even normal school children would go through. So that's your Muharni, your basic alphabet, Gurmukhi alphabet, then Panj Granthi, Sundar Gutka, other texts like Hanuman Natak, Yoga Vashisht. All the other wider Indic tradition texts are listed there. And then he even goes into detail about what you would need to study to become a Gyani. But it's very interesting because one of the things we find in that book, and Littner very much draws these conclusions about how, although Ranjit Singh himself was well known as not being particularly literate, his rule was one that produced literacy of sort of incomparable rates, even compared to the rest of the world, compared to the Western world. You find rates of 80-90% of literacy, and one of the biggest areas was sort of female literacy. So that's just an interesting aside that Ranjit Singh himself was maybe not a master of certain aspects of knowledge himself, but very much was a patron of elevating the population. And you find in that 50-year period of rule just an explosion of knowledge, really, of dere teaching, any type of knowledge. So Baba Bir Singh was a recipient of that. And even just, this is before he receives any other spiritual tutelage from anybody else. This is just the standard curriculum. So it gives you an insight to what was going on in just standard villages across the Punjab region at that time, which is interesting. So he receives this education. The early texts tell us that he already had a very spiritual bent of mind and was engaged in sort of, even at a young age, doing seva in the Gurdwara, doing Naam Simran, just having a very mature outlook for a very young age. His stature is talked about as being quite large. This is something we'll explore, I think, when we look at the paintings, because it comes out quite vividly. There is an interesting sort of parallel that comes out. So when Baba Bir Singh's father passes away, in that time period, you sort of find that children will step into the role of their fathers. So Baba Bir Singh is then offered that place in the regiment where his father served, and Baba Bir Singh takes up that job at the age of 16. So Baba Bir Singh comes to learn military tactics, serves in the army, is involved in campaigns militarily under the sort of Ranjit Singh government, takes part, I think, in attacks on Kashmir, and so is an active soldier, well trained, knows how to do Ghor Sawar, so horse riding, and what we can call Shastra Vidya, hand-to-hand combat with a range of different arms and armour. There's an interesting story in his early military career once that when Babaji gets sort of leave from the army, they come back to the village, Gagobua, and at this time there are raids happening, so you get Daku, like thugs, attacking villages, trying to loot and take riches and whatever. And whilst Babaji's sort of back at his village, there's an attack on the village by some raiders. And there's a vivid description of how Babaji just launches into attack on these raiders to defend the innocence of the village. And there's a really vivid account of how Babaji goes hand to hand in combat with one of these Dakus, thugs. And the thug actually lances Babaji in the shoulder with a spear. So, and Babaji pulls the spear out and then uses that spear to basically impale the guy that's struck him, and then takes a sword and splits the guy in half. So I think, obviously we're not well versed in that type of warfare these days, but the amount of force you would need to firstly pull a spear out that's embedded in you, impale somebody else with it, and then strike them in half, that speaks to someone having a lot of force and being of a build that perhaps we don't perhaps appreciate now.
It reminds me of the accounts of Guru Hargobind.
Exactly, and I think we find echoes of that very, Bardoda Paropakari that comes in Bhai Gurdas, that a big warrior type figure.
Yeah, if we start to sort of show viewers and listeners, I mean, the painting which you'll see on the screen is that one of the immediately obvious things which always shows up in any painting of Baba Bir Singh, but we'll start off with the one from Davinder Singh's collection, is that he is always physically very strong. He's shown to be physically strong, larger than neighbouring figures. I know in sort of I guess traditions of Indian painting, there is sometimes an idea that a more important person can be shown bigger, even though they may not be physically larger. But in these, you can see it's not just someone just shown to be bigger, but being physically strong as well. And it's one of the immediately obvious things.
Yeah.
Davinder, can you tell us a bit about? So we'll show the viewers the painting that we're talking to, but you have a very wonderful visual depiction of Baba Bir Singh in your collection. Can you tell us a bit about how you came across it, and what you take from it when you look at it with your eye?
So I think a number of things come to mind. I think when I think about that particular picture, and like many others, or not just pictures but other objects, what I find interesting about the time that we're in now, as we take interest in these, this material heritage, is that how it's a bit serendipitous, how these things kind of turn up, but equally, these pictures like this will surface with not that much history kind of behind them, and we're lucky with this particular picture because it's inscribed, but in many cases, we're relying very much on those, just like you said, those physical aspects for us to help kind of identify people. So this surfaced in a major London auction house a number of years ago now, and it's, as you say, if you know who you're looking at, you can identify him not just from his size, but his physical kind of features, the star style, and and you say, sometimes characters are portrayed larger than life, but proportionally you can tell that he's a big guy. So even from the size of his hand, his grip, you can, and also the katara, the weapon that he's holding. So it's fascinating for me when you come across pictures like this, to then start thinking about when they were produced, why they were produced, and if you get your mind thinking in that particular way, then you can start to really unpack the details that are in those pictures, trying to navigate those images and work out what is the message that's being told, sent out, and who's also telling that message. And there's quite a lot of detail in this.
Yes, are we correct? This one is from the lifetime of Baba Bir Singh.
So we know that it's probably produced within a few years of his death.
Okay.
So it's
very close,
near contemporary, and as is the case with most of these pictures, you'll see when you see it in the flesh, like many other gouache miniatures, it's heightened with gold, with real silver. These are precious works of art that weren't just produced on the side of a street. This has come from an artist's school.
Yeah.
It would have required a patron. It would have been expensive to produce, and there may have been one or two other copies of it, but more often than not, these are kind of one-off kind of pieces. So it just makes you think about, at that time when it's produced, this is a document of the period. Somebody is documenting Baba Bir Singh not long after his very tragic death.
Yeah.
Did you know it was Baba Bir Singh when you bought it? Did the auction house sell it as Baba Bir Singh? I'm obviously asking you to remember.
They did, I think. I think they did. And because of the inscription, which they had translated, that was the only character they knew. You know, we obviously will talk about the other characters in the picture. And I was familiar with another painting of Baba Bir Singh, a really beautiful one painted by Bishan Singh, which is in the Kapani collection. And you can tell, you know, they're almost mirror images of each other in terms of his posture, in terms of the details. So it was. I think he's quite easily identifiable. I think once you pick him out at that time of his life.
Yeah, we spoke about this in the previous part one of the discussion as well. You know how like images could circulate and copies could be made, and I guess it'd be interesting if like this is one of the earlier paintings of Baba Bir Singh, whether this is one which then was used to make tracings or like copies which then shaped other ones. Because some of the key features, I mean, which you find later on, you really see them here. I
mean, just going back one step to kind of the age of this picture, and then talking about the larger Langar scene, the Bishan Singh scene. We know that that's going to be at least 25 years, probably after this picture. So, you know, a school of an artist school will retain these. They'll have preparatory sketches. They'll have, you know, pounced kind of pricked out stencils. You would have had students working from a master copy to produce other copies because somebody else wanted to have a copy. Some of that work then also translates into frescoes because it's those same schools of artists that are producing works on paper. They might also be working in a dera or in a dharamsala or whatever, like doing frescoes as well. So you see these kind of similarities, and then you see that shift also coming into kind of woodblock prints, and then those prints you see being sold in the bazaars because they're being more mass produced, but they're coming from this. This is the source, really.
What's interesting though is we have two paintings, the Langar one and the Kapani and your one. Clearly we know there's a time gap between them, but we have the artists as well. So we know one is Bhagat Singh, the other one's Bishan Singh. And so it makes you think that Bishan Singh would have had access to this because the likeness is too exact for it to be coincidence. So Bishan Singh must have had some reference.
And Bishan Singh also isn't painting from life.
No.
You know, this is Bishan Singh's painting is a posthumous painting 25 years later. You know, extremely vivid, wonderful, like probably the finest quality in terms of what we see in Sikh miniature paintings, also inscribed in English. And in its so he's obviously referencing something else, but he clearly has access.
Who is Bishan Singh painting for? Have we identified?
So he paints. So we know that sometimes he's he is being patronised by the Darbar. So we know that his brother, for example, Kishan Singh, is then patronised in the I think he goes to the Fulkian states. I think Nabbar or Kapurthala, I forget now, but he, after having worked in Amritsar and Lahore, he then travels out that way and he's given patronage. I'm pretty sure it's Kapurthala actually. And then also you've got the fact that you've got these English inscriptions. You know, a number of Bishan Singh's works we have surfaced in Europe. So they've surfaced in Europe and have been in here in collections for quite a while. So in the current exhibition, you'll remember the wonderful painting of Darbar Sahib, which is signed by Bishan Singh in gold, and that's been had been in a French collection probably for the best part of 150 years. He was also painting. Many of his paintings were actually exhibited in Lahore in the 1860s, and he was selling those pictures. And the fact that they're inscribed in English suggests that somebody who's buying it is taking it away. It's almost, I think in one of them, which one is it now? I forget now. It might even be one of them says souvenir, on it in French.
Okay.
You know, so it's that's the market that he's kind of mainly painting for. Is an external market, and there's other small clues also with regards to some of his patrons. So for example, in the painting of Ranjit Singh in Darbar in the Lahore fort, and he's sitting on the golden throne. that dates from about 1865. Bishan Singh enters that into a competition, wins first prize. It's an unfinished picture, right? And it's one of his finest pictures. And it's the Ranjit Singh's Darbar, but there's not one French or Italian officer that's visible. And you look at that and you think, well, how could he miss out such a detail? And then you realise that by the time he's painting, the British are in charge.
There are no.
He's also he's painting. It's not that they're not around, but he's also not going to insult the British necessarily by putting them in, because he's painting a scene which is dating to the time of Ranjit Singh, so he should put them in, but he doesn't necessarily.
Those details are really cool. I mean, one thing I am always drawn to is like the way these like paintings are kind of like made to be viewed, so to say. That B.N. Goswami, he did a lot of sort of research into this, and his sort of art analysis has done a lot to show how there was this like culture of like enjoying paintings and looking at them in a particular way, which you develop it through doing the action of looking at paintings. So I want to sort of like kind of engage in that a little bit, and starting from like the base of the painting. We could start from the borders, but we may go on a tangent with that. But starting from the base of the painting, which I love because it shows like a traditional dari, on top of which there was a second dari as well. And I find this quite significant because it's compared to the painting of Baba Sahib Singh Bedi, where they're shown, the one from your collection and also others too, where they're shown seated on what looks like a very sort of like finely woven carpet. This is something which is more simple. It's a dari and actually a relatively simple design, which is telling us something, I feel.
I think that's right, because the thing is, we have to remember, in sort of traditional Sikh orders of spiritual lineages, you have your Gristi and then you have your Virakat. So you have your householder saints and you have your ascetic types. Now, Baba Bir Singh didn't have a family. They were not Gristi, right? Baba Sahib Singh was. Baba Sahib Singh had 2 wives and several children, three sons. So when we talked about this a little bit towards the end of the last discussion about Baba Sahib Singh being considered like a Raja Jogi. So having balanced worldly attachment with spiritual progression and keeping the two in check. You then do get Sikh orders like the Seva Panthis where marriage is not really permitted. The reason being is that these people then wholeheartedly devote themselves to Seva of the community. And we know that Baba Bir Singh was instructed, and we'll get onto the Langar later, but in Seva, right? So this depiction is echoing that, because Baba Bir Singh has no, as per these traditions, no right to dress that way in that sense, no right to be like a regal king. He's not a Gristi, he's an ascetic in a sense, but still operating in community. And so I think his simplicity is shown this way to sort of echo that school of we're not taking family, we're not engaging in, and in maybe a story I'll share later, Baba Bir Singh actually points to this being the difference between him and Ranjit Singh. So I feel the artist is probably echoing that a little bit.
And it's also possible. It's also there's the symbolic aspect of it, but there's also the reality of what this is probably what they're more likely to be sitting on in somewhere like in the Naurangabad.
I mean, most of these depictions are, they're vistas in. They're kind of uncovering a screen to let you see into this world, and as is always the case, there's always elements of propaganda that we're going to try and kind of analyze and think about as somebody is trying to either portray themselves or somebody else, and more often than not, it's the patron who's going to portray himself kind of more kind of favorably in that depiction. But it's also, I think, interesting, like the timing of this picture. I'm thinking about, not long after this very dramatic event. And I mean, we'll go into a bit more about the composition here, because sometimes often you look at a picture, and when you have a key figure, let's say it's a spiritual leader or the guru, for example, sometimes one of the first things you should often do is to look at, well, who are they meeting in this picture, right? Who is it that's sitting with Guru Gobind Singh in this picture? And we find that time travel exists in these pictures often. So people are pointing at, it's not about the accuracy of, how old someone is, particularly at what point in their life. They're kind of trying to find someone often at their peak, but also it's like, well, who is going to be inserted into this picture meeting the guru or meeting a spiritual advisor? And that's often where you've got to look and think, well, why is that person sitting in that position? There's some wonderful pictures where, I think it's Baghel Singh, Missile period, commissioning a picture where he's under the tree listening to Bhai Mardana and Guru Nanak singing Kirtan. We know that obviously they didn't coexist, but then he suddenly places himself back, or somebody else will be meeting Guru Gobind Singh and the Sahibzade, like, put me in that picture, be at that crucial event. So I think that kind of points us at kind of looking at, well, what else is being depicted here?
I mean, we see that with the 10 Sikh gurus as well. Obviously, they're commonly depicted all together, even though they're not contemporaneous. Even in the Bedi Asthans we see this, because in the main fresco painting that we discussed last time, you've got Baba Sahib Singh, several of his sons, and several of the grandsons. And we know the grandsons were born after Baba Sahib Singh passes away. So we know it was Sujan Singh, the grandson, and son of Baba Bikrama Singh, who commissioned this Asthan. So we know that what's happening there is that the grandson, the Bedi grandson, is visualizing that this is the family lineage. What's lovely about it is that he also includes the spiritual lineage. So you see a mixture of these figures in that painting.
What's actually interesting is in Gurdwara Bikrama Singh Bedi, like in these paintings we're talking about, that kind of like conceptual organization of figures, it also finds its way into the way Das Guru showed as well. So there are other examples of this sort of thing where it's actually, because they're not labelled, you have to think about like what the order of which guru is where. And for example, there's one here where you've got I think it's Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji on the left, and then sometimes you get commonly this one where you've got Guru Gobind Singh Ji sitting opposite, but this one doesn't show that. And I still haven't fully worked out, but it may be showing Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji, and then showing Guru Gobind Singh Ji, so showing like their like family relationship rather than just the line of the gurus.
That's very interesting. I think the other, just whilst we've deviated into this path, it's quite interesting that portrait that shows Baba Sahib Singh and his blood relatives and the spiritual descendants, that all the blood relatives are on the left-hand side, and Ranjit Singh's on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, behind Baba Sahib Singh, that's where the spiritual descendants are sitting. So you've got Chote Sant Veer Singh, who was a disciple of Baba Khuda Singh, and then you've got Vadde Baba Bir Singh, who's Baba Bir Singh Naurangabad, and they're both sitting behind Baba Sahib Singh. So it's almost like on one side you've got the spiritual authority, and on the other side you've got all the family, worldly type people who are there also, who may well be spiritual descendants too, but it's interesting that the sort of well-regarded saints are all sat on one side. So yeah, it speaks
the conceptual organisation. I mean, that particular painting, of which there are actually, I mean, within the Gurdwara itself, there's two variations. So there's the one which is when you go in through one of the doorways, just above. And then there's the variation, which is when you go inside, which is a bit more detailed, you can say, and a bit more well preserved, because it's actually, it's inside a covered structure. But in those ones, it's quite interesting because you've got Baba Bir Singh being shown as a Sevadar there, whereas in the paintings on paper, they're shown as someone who others are doing seva of in a way. And it's only through the wall paintings you can really see the side of Baba Bir Singh, which was that he was, in seva of.
I think in that case, I mean, it's, we have that large, Kapani collection painting, the Bishan Singh one, which shows him, in that seva role, in that wonderful Langar. And then this particular picture, as we look at it now, the portrait of him there, we look at his gestures, you look at what he's holding this huge guitar, he has his hand, there's certain iconography, isn't there, that allows us to pick out who he is, or who Sahib Singh Bedi is in a particular picture by what he's wearing, or differentiating Guru Gobind Singh from Guru Har Gobind, or whatever it might be. And here you see him, there's action, there's direction, he has his finger pointing, he's pointing it, that shows a man who is controlling something, but also leading something, directing something. And whilst he's pointing that finger, he's holding this gadar. Right? It's very significant, especially as this is post his death. So by this time, he already has a reputation for someone who's potentially relinquished that kind of military career, but he's been given this as a symbol at this moment. And who is he pointing at? Do you want to talk a little bit about who's sitting in front of him here?
Yeah.
It's interesting because the hand positioning speaks of one giving instruction. What I really like about the painting in your collection is that whoever's painted it, like you were saying about in terms of depicting Babaji's size, has sized the guitar correctly. Because it would look silly if the guitar was tiny, because it wouldn't fit in the mutta, in the fist of the... Because if anyone's ever held a guitar, if it's not wide enough, you can't get it, because it's a punch dagger, so you need to hold it in a closed grip, right? So if you can't get your hand in it because your hand's too big, then it doesn't work. So you've got a guitar that's the right size for that type of build of a person. I really enjoy that detail in whoever's painted it.
I mean, other sort of details. I mean, before we want to get to Bhai Maharaj Singh, there's little sort of things to like try and get in. Is so the thing about the asthans, like the actual the position, and even like the hands. I know there's significance in, like, you can say traditional, the Indic philosophy and theology about like positions, even like whether the side of a birasana, which side or which leg you're actually resting on, whether it indicates sort of like I'm not an expert in this, but I've sort of the osmosis, like understood some of this from other more learned people, that there is significance. It's possibly even like which hand is pointing and which hand is holding the guitar. It may not just be just random. They may actually have some kind of like political type of like reasoning behind it, that to pass the guitar is in his left hand right now until it goes into his right hand, it means a different thing.
It's interesting because as I was reflecting on my previous comments as well, there's layers here. So you've got Baba Bir Singh at his core being depicted in a very simple jola, a white, very simple, long tunic type garment.
Well, not so long actually.
Yeah, not so long, but long, not like a t-shirt, but longer than that. And then in a kashera as well. On top of that, you have this overcoat, which looks a bit more opulent because it's green in color with a purple lining, and you still have the signs of spiritual rule. So you've got a Jar Sahib going, and you have a Chandoa, a canopy over the top too. So there are layers here, and if you look at the spiritual lineage of Naurangabad, it comes to the present day with probably the most famous of our times is Sant Isha Singh, whose birthday is coming, and who was also renowned for this, having a very simple attire, but then at times adorning slightly more opulent clothing. And I think the point being is that at their core, they're very simple, humble, saintly beings. It doesn't really matter what their trappings are. So the artist here is also still trying to show, I think, with those items being in position, that this is someone who commanded respect, who would receive offerings. Because where has that overcoat come from? It's come from someone of means, right? And a normal devotee can't give something of such value, right? So that's been given by someone who has the means to give it. And that speaks volumes about the prestige they enjoy.
I mean, even more detailed, they're not actually wearing it. They just got it in the shoulders.
Yeah, it's just draped over.
It's just in the shoulders. They're not sort of like kind of contained by it. They can just like slip it off if they need to, and they can go back into the Langar and do a seva as they were doing.
Very interesting point, because both hands are free, right? And one hand is teaching, and the other hand is holding a weapon, which is in as we say in Sikh art, shows some sort of level of authority, some sort of martial prowess, some sort of mastery over what they're practicing. And it's interesting that all four paintings that we have, there's one in Tatadibba, there's the Kapani one, there's a painting in the Naurangabad Asthan showing Babaji with his spiritual preceptor Baba Bir Singh. And in all of those paintings, there is some element pointing to martial tradition. So not in your one, but in your one you've got the guitar, so that's one insignia. In the one at the Gurdwara Naurangabad, Babaji is sitting in a birasana, the warrior position. And it is poetic that Babaji's name is Baba Bir Singh, the warrior, essentially.
He also in our picture, he also has an armed attendant,
Yeah.
right, waving the fly whisk. Like who is not just he's not just a fly whisk attendant. He's
Yeah.
also a bodyguard, isn't he?
bodyguard.
Like he's an armed.
Who looks surprisingly sort of like royal, you can say, for someone who would be doing seva, essentially like a sadhu.
Yeah, his attire, the attire of the attendant is one of the sort of more Sarkari, governmental Sardar type.
Yep.
He's not wearing the traditional type gold dastard that you see of the other two figures. He's wearing the gold dastard, but then with the drapings over the top. That's how you start to see what the modern day development of the dastard, which from my research seems to have come from Afghanistan, actually. Because the Afghan Sardars used to wear very big, and you can actually see it now if you look at the way people in Afghanistan dress. They tie these big V-shaped dastars over the top, and we know that, like Hari Singh Nalwar and all that conquering that was going on, pushing the Afghans out and taking some of their wealth as well, like the Kohinoor. We know styles come across too. So it's interesting.
If you can even read more into it, I mean, the fact that you've got someone who's like looking more royal doing the Jada Sahib Seva, which, I mean, there's a side sort of tangent point. People who maybe not familiar with viewing these sort of paintings, you know, something like a Jada Sahib, you might only associate with, you know, one of the Das Gurus or something like that. But practically speaking, it was probably like very normal for anyone who had a little bit of importance and standing when they were like in like a darbar or a court, for actual genuine practicality, not just symbolic importance, but also practicality, that someone who was giving instruction, you know, if you were being bothered by a sort of flies, it wouldn't look good, basically. So there's a very sort of normal, sort of practical sort of aspect of it, which we can kind of forget about. You know, you go to India without air conditioning and fans, and like you find yourself needing these things.
And it's not just that; it's kind of like on the Jar Sahib and that whole setup. The Jar Sahib is across India an instrument of royalty. Yeah. So any Raja, no matter how small, you might be the Punjab Hill States, you might be the Rajputs. Even down south, I've seen today, like in modern videos, you see puja going on the banks of the Ganga that the Hindus are doing, and they're using really small Jar Sahibs on their deities. So as things have moved on modernity-wise, the Jar Sahib perhaps become less prevalent than it was in society at that time. Yeah. So the Jar Sahib itself wasn't like a mutually exclusive indicator of this is the Guru only. Do you see what I mean? Nowadays it's come to be seen that way because we only see the Jar Sahib done on Guru Granth Sahib Ji.
We don't use it as a practical object.
Well, it's not used as a practical object, you see. I've always found that you can tell deference by seating height. That was really the biggest tradition. So if Guru Granth Sahib was going to be in Hajuri, what position does Guru Granth Sahib occupy in relation to these people? And you would find in old paintings that traditionally Guru Granth Sahib, and this comes from Guru Arjan Dev Ji's time, even in Surya Prakash it's written that from the earliest time that Gurbani came into a bound manuscript form, that Sarup always took the highest point. Leave all the other nishanya to one side. Height plays a big role. So whatever is seated at the highest point commands the respect in that environment. And that's what you see. If Guru Granth Sahib is going somewhere, then the height position of Guru Granth Sahib is always higher. And that I've always found to be the sort of real definition of power, if you see what I mean.
There's another detail that we mustn't forget, because I found fascinating, that you further shed some light on. But I think I mentioned to you that I'm not sure whether it's depicted in the paintings, but the skin condition that is clearly visible. You know, Baba Bir Singh here clearly has these kind of purple kind of marks on his skin, and I think I mentioned to you, I think, that wouldn't just be an accident. He must have had something. And then, do you want to share what you found?
Yeah. So I didn't even notice that, which is why this conversation is so wonderful, because every time we look at this painting, something new is popping out, and I hadn't noticed, even once you pointed out the leg marking, I didn't notice the one on the face. So there are many sort of stories or instances in the Bir Mrigesh, which is this biography that we're using to construct our sort of knowledge of Baba Bir Singh. Many instances of Baba Bir Singh doing ardas or coming across someone with this disease called kohar. And it's mentioned specifically, and it is, when you Google it, it is a purple granulomatous disease, like a pustular purple disease.
One of the things, I think it's used for multiple. I mean, like disease sort of descriptions in like traditional Punjabi Hindi can be like one name can describe a number of diseases, and accord is also sometimes used to describe leprosy. Yeah. But there may be another.
And leprosy is a skin condition. Yeah. So any sort of like raised, rash, pustular skin condition seems to come under this name. And there's like I even perused further. There's like at least 4 or 5 different sakhis of Baba Bir Singh curing someone of this ailment. But there's a specific reference where this lady comes with this disease, this cohort, and she says to Baba Bir Singh, basically, I can't deal with this. And Baba Bir Singh's solution is that she should offer a certain amount of salt to the langar. So salt is like currency in this time period. I mean, now it's so readily available, nobody really gives it value. But you know, even the expression measuring someone's salt in English comes from the fact that salt was almost like commodity. It was something that was of high value in the pre-modern era, right? So even offering salt in the langar is quite a big daan. It's not a small thing. So Babaji says that you need to give a certain hissa in the langar, and then the ardas will be done for you. And she does this, and in the sakhi it sort of says how whoever partook in that langar then also took a bit of this disease on themselves. So I think most of us will be familiar of the idea of saints taking someone's dukh or their sorrow or their pain, and this seems to be a nishani to that Babaji would do ardas for this condition and perhaps take a little bit on. And so the sakhi sort of goes on and says that everybody in the langar got affected for a few days and then it cleared. But it is interesting that it's not really mentioned as this is something that affected Babaji from birth, like perhaps Ranjit Singh's smallpox. It's something that's mentioned as like an intervention by Babaji for other people. And really interesting that the artist felt the need to put it in there, right? And for people to see.
Significant enough, and it's perhaps like a known thing about Baba Bir Singh that this took place, and you know.
I mean, there's a really interesting. What I love about this discussion and the fact that it's so timely with your exhibition, Davinder, like especially because your focus in the exhibition is Ranjit Singh. These saintly individuals really they follow the rise and fall of his power, right? You know, Baba Sahib Singh is there setting the foundation, watching the ascendancy. Baba Bir Singh sort of there in the middle, watching it all unfold, and there towards the tail end. And then Bhai Maharaj Singh, who we're going to get onto, is there at the end. And they're all following this trajectory. And there's a really interesting story where there's a point at which after Baba Sahib Singh's passed away, Maharaja Ranjit Singh comes to visit Baba Bir Singh. And you think, why not? That's quite natural, because if we think about the spiritual mantle that sort of passes to Baba Bir Singh after Baba Sahib Singh passes. And Ranjit Singh comes with a lot of offering, plates and plates worth of thaliyan, paise, rupaye and patase. And he says to Baba Bir Singh, "Tusi parwan karo, can you put this in the langar?" And Baba Bir Singh responds quite forcefully, and even before this point, there's a whole like paragraph, like 3 paragraphs where there's an exchange where Baba Bir Singh would give a hukm as to whether the Sarkar could sit down or not. Whoever came, they have to be told that Tusi baith jo hun. And Baba Bir Singh keeps Maharaj Ranjit Singh standing for like half an hour. And in the text it mentions that like Raja Gulab Singh and all these guys are thinking, oh, Babaji de man vich narazgi hona, Babaji must be annoyed with Ranjit Singh. But in what's actually happening is a parikya, a test. And the thing, what makes me believe this account is that we know Ranjit Singh's character is one of quite. He's very generous, not just to the Sikhs, right? We know he donates, not just if he's going to plate Gurdwara Sahib in gold, he does the same with the Somnath temple and other spiritual places. And we know that he actively seeks the company of saints, does it regularly. And even Kirtanis, it comes in Baba Sahib Singh Ji's Granth, like pretty much any ragi that comes in there's some test with Ranjit Singh. But Baba Sahib Singh has propped up this Raj, as far as we can tell, at least in the spiritual mindset. Everyone's, he's coronated Ranjit Singh. He's given legitimacy to that. This is the guy who's going to unify Punjab and bring Sikh rule, and we still remember it that way. And I think people at the time perceived it that way, and other communities perceived it that way too. The Muslim community, the Hindu community, the more less sort of intertwined Hindu side, perceived it that way too. And what's interesting about it is that you suddenly see how Baba Sahib Singh's giving legitimacy, but they're also keeping that Raj at length. They see it a little bit as a bit poisonous almost, because they're testing people. So one of the big tests that keeps happening to these Ragis and these spiritual people is, are they going to take money from Sarkar or not?
Yeah, the point that
are they going to take money from Sarkar or not?
They've got to remain incorruptible.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and be seen as being incorruptible.
And they also they perceive that, you know, because Ranjit Singh is royalty, he's not. You know when we grow up, right? What do we get taught? We get taught Naam Japo, you know, Kirat Karo, Vand Ke Shakko, right? Those are the three pillars we get taught. You can argue about the when they come about, but they're rooted in tradition. Naam Danish Naam. And we're all taught, okay, Sikhs don't gamble. They earn by honest means, by the sweat of their brow, not through exploitation. And I've just finished translating a Nana Prakash Sakhi about Bhai Lallo and Malik
I was just about to say it was coming to mind.
Yeah, and we know that that's one of the earliest Sakhis, right? Of when Guru Nanak Dev Ji's doing this prachar of, you know, the blood coming out of Malik Baggu's roti and the milk coming out of Bhai Lallo, this very visual thing that if you're going to exploit or you're not going to earn by your own real hard grit. And in some respects, right, if you're a Raja, you're not out in the fields necessarily earning by the sweat of your brow, are you? You're earning through tax and sort of the state functioning for you. You haven't necessarily gone out there. You might have done it earlier, but not when you're Sarkar, right? And so there's this whole idea of Baba Bir Singh actually refuses Ranjit Singh's donation. He says something really beautiful. Baba Bir Singh says, "Asi dono gur pai hai gaya, Baba Sahib Singh de." So I liked this because you never really, in the accounts of Ranjit Singh, you don't come across him as the devotee that often, unless you're looking for it. And this idea of him being a gurbai, like a disciple, like a colleague almost, because they've both sought spiritual instruction. They're peers, exactly. Peers having sought instruction from Baba Sahib Singh. But what Baba Bir Singh goes on to say is, Baba Sahib Singh menu, you know, sway atam da raj baksha. What that means is that he's given me command or rule over the sense of self, meaning atam gyan. Understanding what your true nature is, that you are Atma, you're actually this divine consciousness inside. You're not the body. Basically, breaking the shackles of what we're here, what we're meant to do. And he says to Ranjit Singh quite openly, "Tanu basada di raj baksha hoya." Basada meaning Prithvi, meaning the earth. So there's this distinction that it's come from the same source, right? And Sikh tradition has had this from the beginning. That any sort of worldly power is derived from the spiritual power that may be. And Baba Bir Singh is basically saying to him that, look, we're both good, we're both peers, but I've been given this branch, you've been given that branch. And what he says is, Guru Kar de vich koi kata nahi that you can fill. I have no need of the wealth that you're bringing for me. And Ranjit Singh sort of understands this, and he says, he still makes the supplication, will you please put it in the Langar? And Baba Bir Singh says, no, the only thing I need from you is to partake in the Langar yourself. Partake in the Langar, take the blessings yourself. Your role is to do that, not to give. And so the only thing Babaji actually accepts is the patasse that he brings, the sort of short, you know, the white sugar crystal type mitta that you get at Darbar Sahib occasionally, or that's used in the Amrit Samchar. But even still, Babaji only allows that to be given to Ranjit Singh's army. Any Singh that's in the Dera, Babaji says, "Ona nu na deo." So the idea being that, in some ways, right, you need both. Baba Sahib Singh's given the legitimacy, right? If they were going to say, no, we don't want anything to do with it, they wouldn't bother, right? Baba Sahib Singh wouldn't have coronated Ranjit Singh. He wouldn't have protected him in childhood. He wouldn't have said that this guy is going to be the ruler. So there's an understanding of you need both, but where do both intersect? Where do they both diverge? And who has control over the other? And I just found that very interesting.
Thinking about control is interesting. I mean, like, this will bring us to like the sort of final episode in their life, is that this idea that Baba Bir Singh was someone who was willing to just to give up something which other people would offer. And how, I mean, I look at this and I'm like, that sort of like wealthy looking like chola that this jamma, the overcoat they've got on, they could just slip it off. Which, if you want to look at it in terms of like their physical sareer, the final sort of episode of their life, how they, you know, it kind of like showed how little they were attached to their physical body, you can say.
I think his dress there with the coat. Sometimes, you know, I have one of those which is, you know, silk velvet. Sometimes it's, you know, like the Kashmiri shawl kind of material. Sometimes they have sleeves, sometimes they don't. They're just designed to loop over the top. It almost feels to me as if that's kind of harking back to a previous way of existence for him. It's almost like the kind of coat that a general wears in the battlefield, you know, as they're dictating, as they're giving orders, and they take it off when they need to take it off. That together with the guitar kind of speaks to, you know, the previous kind of existence, the way that he's you know, he clearly has his you know, his white dress that speaks to his spirituality, but he's almost like donned this and picked this up for this purpose.
For the picture.
But for us, like, well, actually, I haven't fully taken kind of said goodbye to that. Like, that's still there. And for this purpose, you know, this is posthumous. Like, he's telling us that we know he died, we know something else is about to happen. This is what's happening, and that's what it kind of suggests me, particularly with, you know, as we were talking about, you know, who he's pointing to, who he's kind of relating to.
You mentioned earlier, Davinder, how this is so. I mean, when this was painted, is so close to the final sort of years. Tell us about that, Resham Singh. Like,
you know, what's interesting is just these thoughts come to mind so spontaneously, and when we start to look at what happens towards the tail end of Baba Bir Singh's life, Baba Bir Singh actually keeps a standing army. So he never really quite relinquishes the military side.
No,
it doesn't. He never becomes a pacifist. And what you start to find is when Maharaja Ranjit Singh passes away, and you have that sort of 10-year period of complete chaos where his successors are being killed off one after the other, the British are making incursions, and you've got all of this happening. Baba Bir Singh is like you find all the sort of people trying to maintain Sikh Raj flocking to him. So I think even some of the Sandhyawala Sevadars come there, and they make camp there, and they bring their armies there. And there's a standing army. So in many ways, the military aspect hasn't left.
No, he's still providing protection.
He's providing protection. And Baba Bir Singh becomes a rallying call almost to protect what's being taken through treachery and bribery of different interests and different parties, right? And this will lead us into who's sitting in front of him in this painting, because you can almost think, well, what Bhai Maharaj Singh goes on to do after Baba Bir Singh is made a martyr very much relates to this, right? And you can almost, maybe what's being depicted, what is Baba Bir Singh saying with a guitar in hand to Bhai Maharaj? Very much you could perhaps postulate the Sikh
passing of the mantle.
Yeah, the mantle. Like, you're going to fight the British. You're going to fight this Malay, and the language that's used in the Bir Mukesh is the Malayish Khalsas come now. So that's referring to the Dogras and the whole machinations that they're doing, like Hira Singh Dogra and that whole sort of side of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's court that is trying to usurp the power away from the legitimate heirs in favour of their own family. And we know what role they come to play in the downfall of the Sikh Raj. So this painting, given that it is only 2-3 years after Baba Bir Singh's martyrdom, I think does echo that. So what ends up happening is Baba Bir Singh is encamped at his dera in Santapura, and it's thronging. So we know that Baba Bir Singh was renowned for running this massive langar, which is why Bishan Singh's painted that langar scene. There are accounts of up to 5,000 people being fed in that langar. In today's terms, that doesn't sound like a lot, but we have to remember the population of India was probably a quarter of what it is now. And the idea of cooking for that many people in one day would have been a huge feat, right? We're talking, getting that much food, log fires, running those log fires, cooking 5,000 people is a huge amount of people. And that langar scene is actually quite beautiful because it depicts that and the length and breadth of the diversity of the people.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And I think just very quickly, like Bishan Singh, what I love about his paintings is that he does, like where the other paintings of Baba Bir Singh or Baba Sahib Singh tend to be, there's no more than 5 people in the painting. It's all very solitary. Bishan Singh, probably for me, I'm not that well versed, but his are the most crowded in terms of showing massive scenes, perhaps drawing on European inspiration, because
he's bringing in
Europeans paint more in that way. Sometimes big landscapes, big scenes, everything going on, and maybe he's drawing inspiration there. Whereas your miniature painting tends to be only a couple of individuals.
Certainly
right?
the scale of his pictures is larger.
It's quite unique.
He's adding different perspectives as well, which is very much.
And maybe he's trying to, because we know the British find the Indians very exotic, so everything's very exotic: spices, clothes, armaments, everything becomes very, and maybe he's trying to show
there's
that
lots of action. There's always a lot of
yeah.
activity.
Yeah. So coming back to Baba Bir Singh's story, we know the Langars are running, Baba Bir Singh's running this massive thing. It's a bakshish from Baba Sahib Singh. And what ends up happening is that Hira Singh, he's pretty much wresting control away from Maharaja Ranjit Singh's successors, the legitimate successors, you could argue, away from his wife in power. And Hira Singh manages to amass an army to launch a full frontal assault on the Dera. And so he comes with a very large force who are equipped with cannons. So this is the other interesting thing. So it's very specifically mentioned they come with torp. And we know the cannons are something that Maharaja Ranjit Singh's reverse engineered in a very short space of time, because they're not indigenous to Punjab or to India. They've come with the British, and Ranjit Singh has managed to secure them. And they use those very cannons on this encampment. And Baba Sahib Singh, actually, who's someone that I'm very fond of, Sevapanthi, and who was contemporary to Baba Bir Singh, Babaji's lifespan was 123 years, from 1803 to 1926. So when Baba Bir Singh attains Shahidi, martyrdom, Baba Sahib Singh's 30 years old, mid-30s. So this event rocks the Punjab. I don't think we can, and I think this is why this painting is made, and this is why Bishan Singh paints it, because this is the last stand really before Bhai Maharaj Singh's going to make it, but this is where we start to see,
It's a single. I think it's a single event,
moment.
which is a single event which points to the internal kind of collapse, doesn't it? It's like you couldn't, like, to be firing on your most sacred, into turning the guns on your own. This is that moment. It's like everybody else just needs to sit back and watch this. This is the kind of.
I think there was shock, and the shock is encapsulated. Baba Sahib Singh writes that Baba Bir Singh sat there it's very poetic, like a mountain. And one of the things that stands out in all, and there are eyewitness accounts of this Shahidi, that Babaji ordered the entire surrounding not to fight back. So remember, Babaji had an army, because Babaji's instruction was that in Hira Singh's army there are Sikhs as well. It's not a foreign army, it's not the British. I think this is where sometimes people may not realise. This is the first instance in maybe 40 years, because we covered how the Sikhs were fighting each other before Ranjit Singh. This is a in everybody's eyes, like a regressive step of Sikhs now, after 40, 50 years of people not really fighting each other, no all-out warfare. Yeah, lots of politics, lot of sort of like meandering with the Fulkian states and all of that, but no warfare. Now we've got all-out warfare and Sikhs are fighting each other. Baba Bir Singh says, no, prepare Deg, prepare Langar. The people who are coming to attack are going to be hungry. And what you see is Baba Bir Singh being this bastion of forbearance. And he sits there, and some of the descendants, they actually still have, I think at Naurangabad, they have the kashara of Babaji that's stoked in blood. They say it's Babaji's. And there's accounts of Babaji being hit by cannonballs, people falling around left, right, even a child attendant being struck by a cannonball, and then the next person coming up to still bear sort of service for Baba Bir Singh, and Baba Bir Singh not really falling, the Maryada of the Dera still continuing, Kirtan still happening until the last man falls. And so it's, I don't know, I mean, in my mind, it's like, not to cheese it out, but like in The Last Samurai, where it's the last stand, and Katsuba goes up with Tom Cruise, and there's like this just whole Shahidi, and everyone gets massacred, but nobody gives up their principle. This is that stand, right? And the reason it reverberates around Punjab is that it's encapsulated in 3-4 eyewitness accounts. Baba Sahib Singh writes about it. Baba Bir Singh is painted. And these people who commit this act of sacrilege, because nobody had thought of even doing this. Ranjit Singh had never done it, right? No one else, none of the other Sardars would even think about attacking a holy man. It just wasn't permissible. They'd call this Fauj the Guru Maria Fauj, the one who killed the Guru. Like, could there be any more derogatory term for these people? And at this point, I think people in Punjab, people in this Raj, suddenly realise, have we crossed the point of no return? And I think if you only go 10 years later, right?
They're cursed, aren't they?
And they're cursed. And 10 years later, right, everyone's going to be looking back and thinking, what was the moment that we were basically stuffed? Everyone's thinking, Guru Maria, you killed the holy man.
Tactically, almost the not fighting back makes it all even worse.
It makes it worse. it makes it barbaric.
It's quite a tactical decision, isn't it?
And even more so that people would know that Baba Bir Singh is someone who could fight back. But chose not to.
There's so many lessons in it. I think that one moment is so pivotal that you've got Bishan Singh 30 years later saying, you know what, I need to somehow portray this individual.
Yeah.
And we get probably the most detailed portrayal of Baba Bir Singh and his life, the Langar Seva, in that painting. And it is remarkable, that painting. It's truly wonderful, I think. Yeah.
But pointing towards who Baba Bir Singh is pointing towards, the figure who we've sort of kept slightly out of the frame for the time being. Let's now move on to them. So Bhai Maharaj Singh, the name they most commonly refer to. They're shown seated here, and it's a figure who is not actually, like, I don't think it's labelled in the inscription, but it's through interpretation, connecting this painting to other paintings, to wall paintings and oil paintings. Watercolour, I'm not sure, is probably Bhai Maharaj Singh. So tell us.
So he's obviously very distinctive.
Yeah.
We look at someone who looks a little bit kind of impoverished, a little bit more kind of feeble perhaps in their kind of in the physical presence. That might just be a kind of indication of his maybe his youth at that time, perhaps. But either way, he's distinctive. We can also then, as we did with Baba Bir Singh, look at his posture, his position, and we can find him again in that larger scene, also near Bir Singh and Baba Bir Singh, almost in an identical seating position, dressed the way that he's dressed. Obviously, Bishan Singh's version is a little bit finer, it's a little bit later, the colours are far more vivid, there's more detail, but you can very clearly see that these are the same two characters. We know that, therefore, that this is, we look and we infer that this is Bhai Maharaj Singh, who you can shed some more kind of light on, and this kind of attribution to it being Bhai Maharaj Singh is also further kind of strengthened by looking at other paintings, as you mentioned, the contemporary painting that we know, painted by Colesworthy Grant under the orders of Lord Dalhousie of when Bhai Maharaj Singh was held in captivity when he was in jail in Calcutta. Even there, we can look at what he's wearing. It's we can basically see the parallels, along with other frescoes, along with another miniature.
But before you unpack all these, it'd be just a short sort of insight into who he really was.
I really want to ask you, Davinder, because this has been like this whole revelation about Bhai Maharaj Singh in the last sort of 5 years. I mean, I listened to your discussion with Sarab on Not in the Clouds podcast on this, and we didn't have any of these pictures of Bhai Maharaj Singh until you acquired that one. And when you bought the Baba Bir Singh painting, did you know that was Bhai Maharaj Singh, or did you assume it? What was your thinking?
At the time, it was assumed. Because I can't remember now which came. I think now I'm trying to remember. I think the Baba Bir Singh painting was bought before the painting of Bhai Maharaj Singh, the Colesworthy Grant larger portrait. But I was aware of the fresco, aware of the relationship, also aware of the Kapani picture. So at that point, I think it was quite clear that this is most likely going to be him. So that's one aspect. But then the other larger picture, I mean, that's a special find, particularly given its history, which we'll touch upon.
Yeah. So Bhai Maharaj Singh again. So we're following this lineage now, aren't we? So we've talked about Baba Sahib Singh. We've talked about Baba Bir Singh in given an overview of that life. So the next in line, or one of the next disciples, is Bhai Maharaj Singh. And Bhai Maharaj Singh is this mysterious figure, and we'll touch on some of the other sort of really intriguing aspects of his life in a minute. But we don't really have a birth date for Bhai Maharaj Singh. This is part of the issue that comes into the controversy regarding alleged photographs and paintings and whatnot. But he was born as Bhai Nihal Singh, that was the original name, in Rabbo village. And initially, Bhai Sahib received education from someone called Bhai Tota Singh Nirmala, and that was initial education. And the way that Bhai Maharaj Singh comes into the service of Baba Bir Singh is through somebody called Bhai Samund Singh, who was like another Sangi, another disciple, who knew Baba Bir Singh, and he was the one who brought Bhai Maharaj into that service. So, what gives a clue about the age is that in Bir Mrigesh on page 916, Baba Bir Singh, as soon as he sees this young Nihal Singh, the first thing Baba Bir Singh says is, put this young one to seva in the Langar. The word uses nikka. So we know that there's an age gap between
and remind us of the date of this roughly?
When
is it saying that this is roughly?
It doesn't give us a time period, that's the problem. But we know that when it's being written, or the time period that it's talking about, is that it's putting a gap between the two of them in age. And so when we look at the painting of Baba Bir Singh sitting in that asan where his beard is sort of black-white, it's not at the full, and you've got this Bhai Maharaj with very little dari on his face. We can sort of figure it out from there. So if we know that Baba Bir Singh is mid-60s at the point of Shahidi, working it back then,
there's at least 40
there's at least
years,
between 30 and 40 years gap between them, and so we can work it back.
So we can look at and possibly say, I think this is great because it's it kind of concurs with some of the other kind of analysis from looking at the images. We can probably place Bhai Maharaj Singh's birth around about 1800.
I think so. I think that makes sense based on the descriptions. And I think this is helpful because the word nikka would not have been used unless he was still very much in his adolescence. And I think that speaks.
It's either used if you are young or if you are the youngest. Right? Of a group. Okay.
So I think that points to it. So then we get this whole description of how Bhai Nihal Singh engages in seva in such a one-pointed devotional way. So it talks about he would start to restrict his own eating. So this tends to be a nishani of an insignia of a sadhu, someone who eats little, sleeps little, talks little, and engages more in devotional worship and selfless service. So we find that this Bhai Nihal Singh firstly restricted his own eating to once in Attipa. So in the 24 hours he'd eat once. And then it extended to once in 36 hours. And then once in 48 hours. To the point where it got so extreme that Baba Bir Singh said to him that if you don't eat yourself, your own body will give way. And then how will you do seva? So
but that relates to how he looks.
And that's exactly. So he's depicted almost like bones, right? Because he's not eating.
It's almost like a tapasya kind of thing.
Tapasya, So someone who's doing extreme amounts of seva, physical seva, and not sleeping and not eating, and then.
Is it? Sorry to interrupt you. Is it saying that he's doing that when he's in his earlier days, like when he's kind of not proving himself, but he's going through.
He's going through the motions.
So that also speaks to him being quite young in that picture.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Okay. And then it gets even more extreme because it specifically says he would only eat the dry or burnt leftovers of the langar. So whatever jo bachaya, like the very dregs, right, which nobody wants. When you get the clump in the key, nobody wants it. Right, you're getting that, right? He would drink the water that was used to wash the utensils. So bande manjane, he would drink that sort of like you get a bit of dal flavoured pani at the end when you're washing. That's what he would drink because he was purely having food to survive, not for taste. Basically subsistence.
But it's also aside from that, there's a biggest act in humility, isn't it?
And then now there's a really lovely visual description, and I've got to read it in the original purely because it is so beautiful. So Bir Mrigesh, it says, Sardi garmi ka sama kuch na bicharna, choti si kach ar pure kahi sir ke uppar feta. So Sardi and garmi, in the winter or the summer, he didn't pay any attention. His attire was the same. A small kafani is like a small chadar, like a fakir would put, like a small sheet. So you can see he's in both your painting and the Baba Bir Singh one, both in your collection, he's literally only wearing this tiny chadar, barely covering himself.
Similarly, also like there's the painting at Naurangabad, which shows them as well
in the same way,
wearing almost like a tiny little vest kind of thing.
So we've got this barely wearing anything, kashera and almost like a shawl type thing. Doesn't matter what the weather is, and pure kafni 12 maas gale rakhni. ये बात कोई भी नहीं जानता था कि किसी समय में लंबा भी पड़ता था कि नहीं पड़ता. So his seva is so tireless. Nobody knows when he lies down or whether he lies down or not, as in to sleep. And so he's wearing this kafani, 12 it says it's a 12 maas for 12 months. That's all he's going to wear around himself. Nobody knows when this guy sleeps because nobody sees him sleeping. When does he lay his head to rest? Nobody knows. And then it goes on to say, ये भी नहीं जान सकते हैं कि इसका शरीर मांस हाड़ का था कि बसार का था. Nobody knows whether his body is made of bone and skin or basara. Basar is basically dal. So he's so covered in the stuff. You know when you're doing Langar seva, right? All the chirte come on you. You get dal stains and you get covered in the stuff that you're. I don't know if you've ever you've been in the Langar and somebody's giving dal from across the room and you basically get soaked in it, don't you?
But with these, if you look at the Langar, the way they're making these big diggy, they would say,
vats,
it's known. You have to go inside them to clean them. So it's not necessarily just like a kind of exaggerated description. It's actually showing the reality of what their life was like.
Yeah.
And which, also explain why they were not wearing very many sort of clothes. In the Kapani collection painting, none of the Sevadars appear to be wearing many clothes because of the fact, partly because it was going to be an impractical thing.
Yeah. It's so hot, right? And anyone who's been near a log fire knows how hot it gets. And then you've got this massive iron utensil steaming pots of stuff.
Yeah.
You're just going to, and then imagine that in the middle of Punjab summer, you're just going to roast, aren't you? So you've got this really, you can just picture it, can't you? This kind of almost a little bit scrawny, barely clad, covered in dal. No one knows when he's sleeping, just constantly running around. And then it goes on to say, "Tisko bhook na neend na thakeva, mano ka tha ke kithe koi devta tha." Nobody knows, is this guy even a man or is he a devta? So tireless is his seva. This is the description. And then, "Sarab sadhu sangat ki seva karta tha, Bhai Maharaj Singh Ji. Bani badi hi madhur mithi bolta." So he would speak very sweetly and he would do sort of tireless seva. And then we get this whole mithi bolta tha, महाराज जी आओ साधु इस प्रकार की मीठी बाणी बोलना सबको पाई निहाल सिंह जी का नाम महाराज सिंह पढ़ता जाता पाया. So this is, we've all heard this, but this is the sort of reference to it, that Maharaj ji, Maharaj, this nimrata, the humility that you say, come king, to anyone who comes, not just the Maharaja, anyone who comes to your door, Maharaj ji, Maharaj, and that is how his name changes.
So he's named after the very word that he's uses to basically greet everybody else. Yeah.
Because, and you find other references, and even Bhai Maharaj Singh's contemporary, who's another son, Baba Khuda Singh, who's also mentioned in this Granth, who is another disciple of Baba Bir Singh. His original name was Jaswant Singh, and he used to say Khuda. So you find this a lot amongst saintly people being renamed in favour of something where that echoes their sort of service. So it's a really lovely visual depiction of how Nihal Singh becomes Bhai Maharaj Singh. And I think it speaks volumes of how Bhai Sahib is depicted in these paintings.
The Langar painting is really nice because it's showing Bhai Maharaj Singh there seated with us on the same chadar dari with Baba Bir Singh, but in front of that Langar, which is where they were one of those things who are doing seva now. He came from there, and through that is what got him the kind of right to sit by Baba Bir Singh and be Bhai Maharaj Singh.
Yeah, so this painting that you acquired of Bhai Maharaj Singh, can you tell us a bit more in detail of where you got it from? And
we're referring,
the big portrait.
So that's, it's once again fascinating. It's amazing what turns up that you didn't know previously existed, and I think what's beautiful about this picture is that it is the provenance. So it came, I bought it at Sotheby's, and it came from the estate of Lord Dalhousie, who was, the Governor General at the time of the collapse of the Punjab, the annexation. And so it came from the estate. So it was, up until 10 years ago, so it was hanging up still at the estate. And it was commissioned by Lord Dalhousie. It was, Lord Dalhousie who requested a local artist in Calcutta, Colesworthy Grant, to paint Bhai Maharaj Singh when he was in custody, when he was in jail in Calcutta before he was being exiled to Singapore. There were a few other portraits that were commissioned that came up in that cell. So in this particular group of objects, with this particular... actually, you just reminded me of something fascinating. It's a little side story, but I'll tell you. So in this sale that happened, there were a few other portraits. I bought I bought another contemporary portrait, not just of Bhai Maharaj Singh, but also of Diwan Mulraj, with an impression of his seal. Him being painted at that time, dated. Some of the Adariwala Sardars, and I also bought a contemporary picture, probably one of the earliest paintings of Dalip Singh whilst he was still in India, painted by a lady called Helen Mackenzie. Also in this sale, that was the objects that were coming out from the collection, just to show you, just to add some weight as to, these are trophies of war, but what other kind of objects were going back to this estate in Scotland. There was a group of chakkar, gilded chakkar. I think it was a set of 3, I think. And I bid on those, and I wasn't successful. They went for too much money. But there was one impression of a chakkar that was there, that was no longer there. I think some of the old accounts said that this is where the chakkar of Guru Gobind Singh once was. So this was also there, having lit Toshakana. So you had these chakkar coming up, and then this kind of impression of Guru Gobind Singh's chakkar once also hanging in this frame. But the Bhai Maharaj Singh portrait, initially it was miscatalogued. They hadn't kind of worked out who it was, but on the back of it, the auctioneers had missed that it actually said his name, but it actually says on the back of it in English, Guru Maharaj Singh, right on the back of it. And then, as we know, when you compare that depiction of him, it ties in very well with the other ones that we know. I think it's also very significant and poignant that this is something, when we think about Lord Dalhousie's role in Bhai Maharaj Singh's imprisonment, exile, his death. This was a trophy of war that he was happy to have sitting on his wall. It was a marker of kind of his success, his triumph over Bhai Maharaj Singh, who is being hunted down. There's a price on his head. Bhai Maharaj Singh wants to kind of incite revolt. He wants to assassinate the resident in Lahore, Henry Lawrence, and when he's finally captured, it's a huge kind of feat for Dalhousie, and which is why he has Bhai Maharaj Singh kind of painted before he leaves. He's one of the first British prisoners in British India to be exiled. He obviously has his own story, huge story in Singapore. So it's hugely significant. Also, I think, even if you don't know that story, I think many people are kind of the actual composition, the way that he's standing, his posture is quite an arresting kind of portrait. You're immediately kind of captivated by this kind of air of defiance. There's a nobility about him, even though he's clearly quite humbly dressed. You're kind of, he looks very handsome. He looks very athletic. He looks very strong. He looks resilient, doesn't he? Like if you look at it, you kind of immediately think, well, who is this? Why is he standing in this way?
He doesn't look destroyed.
Despite being shackled.
Yeah, what's interesting though is when I looked at how I listened to your previous discussion on this, and there's obviously some controversy about that photograph, about whether it is Bhai Maharaj, right? The later photograph I'm talking about. But this painting, the way that his kaffani is draped, it has a very specific way that it's draped. That people don't dress like that normally in Punjab unless there's some saintly figure.
Okay.
It's almost like a gatti, like how you see it, which is like how the Nirmali, that sort of, or if you look at the current Huzur Sahib Jathedar, the way they tie their bana when they're going into seva, that is a very specific way of dressing that a normal Sikh would not do. Only a saintly figure could do that. And so when I looked at the way he was dressed, I thought, yes, it fits with the persona of Bhai Maharaj Singh. And when we think about, and one of the wonderful things that's happened in your exhibition is the display of those objects attributed to have been captured when Bhai Maharaj Singh was captured. So the conch shell, the small garad, the letter, I think the small chakkar, and a ring that says Akal Sahai Maharaj Singh on it, something like that, to that effect, right? So you have to you question how far, because obviously the question is about that photograph, that it's so clear and it's being labelled as Bhai Maharaj Singh. You know the
I
photograph.
mean, yeah, the photograph. I mean,
referring to.
that's an interesting thing in itself. Like how
Yeah.
like these images, which later turn out not to be showing like the
Yeah.
figure that they are, how they. I'm quite interested to know like what is history of that actual image. Where is the original photograph?
Yeah.
Who actually is it showing? Where is it from?
Yeah.
As a separate side story, let alone it being it's not by Maharaj Singh.
Well, but
it has a separate story.
This is the interesting thing about that photo.
I think my point is the level of deception, right?
Yeah.
Because if it's not Maharaj Singh, the person in your painting who's captured, right? Whoever's masquerading as Bhai Maharaj Singh has got a ring that says Maharaj Singh. Can you, like, when he's captured, right?
Yeah.
So you think, were they thinking that deeply that we're going to feign it and we're going to pass this guy off as Maharaj Singh and we're going to give him a ring that says I can't say Maharaj Singh? Or are we thinking too far? Is it actually the case that it is by Maharaj Singh?
There's this whole mythology about like that they were not, because they were so hard to capture. That wasn't mean. I remember studying a little. I wrote about them a little bit in my sort of BA undergraduate thesis about how like they were so hard to capture, basically.
I mean, the whole of the Sohan Lasri's diary at the end, and Chief and Family of Notes, and some special correspondences document that I was looking at from the Empire is just labelled with references to trying to capture Bhai Maharaj Singh. They were infatuated with getting him.
So I think we look at that picture, and first of all, it's great that you pick out those details as to how he's dressed.
Yeah.
We're reliant on the fact that we know that this has been painted from life.
Yeah.
Right. We also have the details from the notes of Colesworthy Grant talking about how his experience of interacting with Bhai Maharaj Singh and Kharak Singh in the background, and how he's not talkative, how he's meditating, murmuring, facing the wall, avoiding kind of direct gaze, and so we've got those notes as well, which is really interesting, and then also you're reliant on the fact this artist is good. He's clearly the artist hasn't made up the way that tunic is tied, or whatever.
No,
he's just painting what he's seeing. Right, but with you're kind of confirming that what he's seeing is correct. The artist probably doesn't know what you know.
No.
In terms of but he's just painting what he's seeing. So now we know, by looking at that, we can then go on one step further to say, well, clearly there wouldn't be any reason for him to not depict Bhai Maharaj Singh at a particular age. So, like, you'd assume that he's got his age right. Now we know that this is the early 1850s. It's dated, right? So then we look at this and say, well, okay, that ties in with what we were saying in terms of when we think Bhai Maharaj Singh is born, based upon the historical account. So let's say he's in his late 40s, early 50s, at the early 50s at the latest, right? The late 40s. So he's not 1850s.
It's earlier.
Yeah, it's earlier.
It's
earlier.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's late 30s, 40s, isn't it?
What's that?
His age probably.
Yeah, so he's going to be born in around about 1800, 1810, something like that, 1805, something like that.
Yeah.
So that kind of all kind of adds up, and then you simply got this. You've got this one photograph, right, that nobody's ever thought about, nobody's ever questioned. Everybody, looks at it and says, okay, here's a photograph by Maharaj Singh, and very simply, the very first thing is that you say, okay, well, we know when he died, right? So we know when he died in Singapore, right? We also know when photography turns up in India, right? So, and the earliest known photographs in India are photographs of the Sikhs. Those are the very first photographs in India. Are the ones of Dalip Singh and the Anglo-Sikh Wars, Divan Mul Raj, Bikrama Singh Bedi. So then you look at that and say, well, actually, okay, that photograph of a very interesting figure isn't a photograph from the 1850s. Also, that figure's armed, isn't he? So how would you possibly have a photograph of Bhai Maharaj Singh armed?
There's multiple reasons why this can't be right, but
but this is the thing, because so either the photograph is him, in which case this isn't him, or the photograph isn't him, which means that this is him, could be him, but then you're asking who the photograph is of and how. That photograph probably dates to the 1870s, isn't it? Right, that's what we're looking at. But it makes you think, because it does make you think about everything that you just said, Resham, about if this is a doppelganger, if this is a double, right, which is a theory that no one ever kind of previously thought about. But why wouldn't the Sikhs have doubles? For their most kind of resilient leaders who are being hunted. Why wouldn't you have that? Everything else was so. You just spoke about the education system. The sophistication of the military.
I mean, the sophistication of education is cool because, I mean, amongst the Poti Sahibs or the Potis which were captured, or the documents, the brief time I've studied them for is that there's one which is like this, I guess, a composite Panchgranthi, Dasgranthi manuscript. It's now sort of divided into two, which is itself interesting because, it gives you an insight into the kind of like range of like Bani, a lot of Dasam Granth Sahib Bani, which is found in there. But also there are additional Potiyan, at least one of them from my memory, and I apologise to any readers who would have researched it, or listeners who would have researched it more and could correct me otherwise, is that one is a Janaki Rajaniti Poti, which is entirely to do with like
politics,
politics and tactics, which is so interesting that the same individual who was like sort of immersed in that Langar Seva, being almost like unrecognisable, could then also be reading this like Rajaniti text.
Maybe that's what Baba Bir Singh was pointing to in that painting. I have that romantic notion, and I just think to myself though, I don't have any historical basis for it. My feeling is, right, the British were so meticulous. They when they got in, they made chiefs from families of note. They did all this documentation. Who are the people? Who are these people? Who's important here? And Bhai Maharaj Singh is the single most existential threat to their rule, because what's happening at the same time when Bhai Maharaj Singh is around Punjab is Bhai Maharaj Singh and Baba Bikrama Singh Bedi, who we're going to come to now, are working together and they're fighting in the Anglo-Sikh wars and they are mobilising. So they are the single most large threat that is threatening British power and dominion over the whole subcontinent. And one wonders then, once they caught him, how much verification did they do? How many people did they find? They may have brought people to independently verify, because we know how sort of thorough they are in their conquests of regions and securing absolute power. And then the other question it's all speculation, but the question that comes up, if it's not Bhai Maharaj Singh, then what was Bhai Sahib doing until that photograph was taken?
Exactly.
Did the zeal for resistance suddenly die? There are big questions that that arise then if we take that narrative. But for me, I kind of think, were the Sikhs, perhaps the Sikhs were not thinking so deceptively the idea of doppelgangers. Perhaps that wasn't.
We know that Guru Gobind Singh had doppelgangers.
We do know
right?
that, yes. Yeah,
so we know that as a tradition
that
is
exists,
there. Yeah. We also know that these are times in which there isn't any photography. There is no true understanding of kind of what somebody looks like. There's accounts of Maharaja Sher Singh, fighting particular kind of Afghan kind of warlords, overlords, and having to send back paintings of their dead bodies to Lahore Darbar to prove that this is the guy that we killed. So you've got this kind of stuff going on.
Yeah.
But it's.
I suppose the most basic thing I was sort of I guess contribute is that when they are captured, like the rebellion does basically.
It does, yeah.
Which, if you see them as nothing but an entity who were sourcing this rebellion, the fact that the rebellion finishes.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't help that with the photograph that sits with the family, that they can't tell you when they first acquired that picture. No. They can't, tell you as to why, when that photograph took place, was commissioned and under what circumstances. But and the only way that possibly can be is if he didn't go to Singapore. That's the bit that I think is, and most of the evidence I think points to simply the fact that simply isn't him.
Yeah.
Then who is it?
But then you also, in the lead up to this discussion, you found that small ivory painting also attributed as by Maharaj. And again, it seems to be this useful depiction, white clothing, very simple, the start. And it's all pointing to this individual being.
Same individual with the little detail of, it's because it's a tiny painting. It's not like incredibly visible, but at the sort of point of the start here, there's a little something, which you also see in the painting of Baba Bir Singh from Davinder's collection, which because they are so tiny, you can only really see them when you zoom in. They appear to be some kind of like a small Gurdwara or some kind of Shastar.
You know what I find fascinating about that is that at this time period you've got like three major anti-colonial figures. Initially you've got Baba Singh Namdariya, Baba Bir Singh, Bhai Maharaj Singh, Baba Bikrama Singh, right? Out of those three, a lot of them have that tiny... So Baba Ram Singh, if you ever look at the traditional photos, has a small khanda here. If you look at the Baba Bir Singh painting in your collection, again, there appears to be a small metal object placed. And even there, again, I think this all speaks to... Because they were contemporaries, and they met, and they did vicharna, but they weren't separate entities. And this is the thing that perhaps we don't realise, that even Bhai Maharaj Singh, Baba Bikrama Singh were working together, and they knew each other naturally, right? It's the same lineage.
Baba Ram Singh in exile, in one of their letters, actually specifically mentioned that they were. I wish I remembered the actual sort of precise phrase, but to the effect that they were looking to carry on what Baba Bir Singh
the common cause were doing. They're all revolutionaries. You know, they all have military past, military histories connected to that.
And do you know what's interesting? It's just occurred to me now. Out of those three, fine, Baba Bir Singh gets made Shaheed, but Baba Bikrama Singh, Bhai Maharaj Singh, Baba Ram Singh, right? Two of them get exiled. So Baba Ram Singh gets sent to Rangoon in Burma. We know from Baba Bikrama Singh's history that he requests to be imprisoned in Amritsar so that he can have darshan of Harmandir Sahib from where he's imprisoned. And one would expect that perhaps because of his status as a Bedi, the British were fearful of exiling him.
That would be one
because they exiled the other two.
Right? He's a landowner.
He's a landowner, but he's a Bedi, and they also have some fear because by this time the British have come to understand the sort of spiritual prowess, the martial prowess of the Sikhs, and what it might do. And exiling a direct descendant of Guru Nanak from the land might be a step too far. So why was he the only one that was allowed to make that choice? And if we move to Baba Bikrama Singh now, probably just to discuss that, because it's his Asthan that's brought this whole conversation together. Baba Bikrama Singh, we really only find a lot of more information about his later life. That's just the way it goes, and that's what he's renowned for. And initially, as the British start to make incursions, Baba Bikrama Singh starts with small acts of defiance, doesn't he?
On his earlier life, one thing which is useful to connect is that he is someone who was in seva of Baba Bir Singh. Which is something which is interesting. How you would possibly think that Baba Sahib Singh, they wouldn't be sending their son to do seva of the person who's doing their seva. But that's precisely what they actually did.
But that's very deep rooted in Sikhi anyway. Even the Guru Sahibs, when the next Guru was their son, would, so for example, Guru Arjan Dev Ji would send Guru Hargobind to seva Baba Buddha Ji, right? So it's quite common where, because I won't speak for the Gurus, but for us as Sikhs, perhaps sometimes when you're directly looking at your father, your worldly relationship interferes. But the idea that you then move to a different spiritual preceptor seems to be quite commonplace.
It's quite commonplace actually. So that's one of the few sort of things we know of their earlier life. So then we find that one of the big things that really annoys the British about Baba Bikrama Singh is that he doesn't give up his cannons and weapons. So Baba Bikrama Singh sort of behind the scenes mobilising, not overtly, building resistance. About those cannons and weapons and things, it's the point which I somehow missed out in our first discussion was that going back to the painting of Baba Sahib Singh Bedi, which when you look into that sort of landscape scene in the back where there's actually two Sikh Sevadars, one who actually has what looks like a small little eagle or a falcon. Towards the left there's a building which I observed it closely in the painting, it's definitely not showing sort of small bricks, and it's not showing a plastered surface. It's showing sort of large blocks of stone. When I saw it, it sort of connected in my head. Possibly it's showing the Qila at Una Sahib, which to this day is a ruin. So when you go there now, there are no sort of it doesn't stand much more above a meter or couple of meters of stone that is stacked, but it's still there, and it's all it's these large sort of stones. And it's possibly showing that same Qila in its original sort of might, and that would have been the Qila where these cannons and guns were being kept.
What's interesting, so Baba Bikrama Singh mobilises, builds the armies, he participates and helps fuel some of the Anglo-Sikh war resistance. But what really gets the British up is this a sort of cache of arms that is not given up. And eventually when they catch up with him, that's what they use as the justification for internment for him.
I mean, before this sort of like period, actually, I mean, the sources which do shed light on him, one of them is like the Gurdwara Baba Sahib Singh, which is probably actually the most, I guess, richest source in their life.
Yeah.
It does cover how during the period after Maharaj Ranjit Singh, on multiple occasions, Baba Bikrama Singh came from Unna Sahib to try to basically reduce this sort of factionalism, and they were talking about sort of giving legitimacy. They were one of the people who gave legitimacy to Maharaj Sher Singh, who otherwise was being sort of like questioned as not being like a legitimate ruler, you can say. So they were drawing back on that sort of earlier role.
Yeah, I think that's fair, because even in Sohanlal Suri's work, Ranjit Singh's diary, by his court chronicler, he mentions that this sort of position of Baba Sahib Singh in the court is passed to Baba Bikrama Singh after his, so we know the middle brother Baba Teg Singh passes early because of illness in his 20s or 30s, and we know the eldest brother is killed in some sort of family issue, and so the mantle then passes to Baba Bikrama Singh, and it's accepted in the Lahore Darbar. So Baba Bikrama Singh, to a lesser extent than Baba Sahib Singh, I think, just because of the passages of time, is still trying to play that, unity role of trying to unite people, trying to give legitimacy to people whose their succession is being questioned, and but obviously it doesn't succeed in the way that we would have hoped.
That's perhaps why it's less remembered.
Yeah.
I mean, the level of activity they would have had would have probably been quite intense.
Yeah.
But, as it's happened when something, I guess, it doesn't work or collapses, it's not sort of, memorised. In the same way as like Baba Sahib Singh Bedi, giving the sort of coronation tilak to Maharaj Ranjit Singh, because that is remembered. Baba Bikrama Singh's efforts to try and achieve the same, because it didn't quite work out, isn't such a celebrated thing, and you only find out through sort of like small mentions and sources.
Yeah, and I think the other big thing is that the exile stories, they kind of hit us in a different way, right?
Yeah.
When the British suddenly cast these people out into the lands of empire, and actually these people tend to, Baba Ram Singh, Bhai Maharaj Singh, whoever went there, were the first roots of Sikhi in those countries, and the Sikhs in those countries, they keep that memory really alive. So anyone who's been to Singapore and seen the memorials to Bhai Maharaj Singh and knows that it's like almost a national figure for the Sikhs in that country. Whereas Baba Bikrama Singh sort of, because I think they were imprisoned in a small gully in Amritsar, they sort of, the memory faded a bit.
But a very interesting gully actually. So it's the area is called Basti Ram.
Yeah.
Which connects back to Baba Dab. By the way, is like actually it refers to kind of like you can say a large doba or like a monsoon lake, which I find very fascinating, because Amritsar geographically was a region which had a lot of sort of seasonal lakes, and I've to this day trying to work out like why it is, but there was a dab there which is named after Basti Ram, who in the last sort of recording was mentioned a number of times.
Yeah, by Basti Ram, famous Sevapanthi saint. But it's interesting you say that, because obviously Amritsar has 5 sarovars, right, and they're all natural water bodies. They're not they were existing
originally natural water bodies.
And so the drainage basin there clearly lends itself for water accumulation. I don't know why, but it's interesting.
Something happened.
But with Baba Bikrama Singh, then we sort of draw a full circle, and we're discussing this Samardastan, which marks the area where they, I assume, were cremated, but at least that they died in this prison.
The remains are
remains. And what's interesting is, again, you have to look at the interesting intrigues of the British. They knew, when you look at families of note, Griffin's work, you find the whole lineage listed there of the Bedi family. So a lot of this information we've corroborated by looking at that. But they also talk about how when they captured Baba Bikrama Singh, they confiscated a lot of the lands in Una,
completely,
a lot. Completely. Left with like maybe 2 jagirs, like 2 villages.
And like the Gila, like the scale of what it must have been originally, and what you see now, it leaves it open to the imagination, like what had happened. I know there the only sort of accounts I know of, there was listeners and watchers can research it more, but a French travellers who record, there's a French traveller, I think it's Victor Jacquemont, who, possibly him, I could have got it wrong, but who travels by Una and seeks to actually meet Baba Sahib Singh Bedi, but according to the account, this group of Nihang Singh guards, they don't allow them in, because, and Ani says because on account that he would pollute the killer. That's how powerful, I guess, anti kind of colonial place.
But the thing is, they're so interesting in how they, and this is not casting any judgment, but it's just the way the British work. So they reduced the power of the Bedis, took away the financial means to cause rebellion, restricted Baba Bikrama Singh Bedi's freedom, but they didn't necessarily imprison Babaji's family. And so we get only a few, Baba Bikrama Singh passes away, I think in 1863, something like that. And then Baba Sujan Singh, his son, is then erecting this samad about 16 years later. And we find in that book, Griffin's book, that he then mentions how Baba Sujan Singh was given a lot more jagir, and sort of just things were restored that were taken away because the threat had dissipated. And so even the British were clever enough to know that if they attacked these key families too hard, that it would provoke a spirit of rebellion that they didn't want. And that's not, again, it's not casting judgment. It's how a government or a shrewd political entity might seek to infiltrate. And it worked very well, clearly, right? Because they managed to then establish their rule for the 100-year period that they were there in Punjab.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much in their interest to stabilise. That's what they're there to do, isn't it?
But sort of going back to the Asthan, which is kind of the reason this whole conversation in a way took place, is that it's an Asthan which Virasati Asthan Seva is really fundraising the conservation of. So the Asthan is fascinating structurally, because it contains some very, very intact pieces of, you can say, Sikh architecture, which, although built mid-19th century, you can say, or late 19th century, because of the fact that there is such limited, you can say, untampered or undestroyed Sikh architecture which survives, it gives this Asthan it's even greater importance. So even if someone didn't have sort of a major historical interest in these various figures, or if they didn't have such an interest in these Sampradayas, these spiritual descendants who are connected to the Asthan, as simply a piece of, even if you're not you're completely unconnected to the Sikh tradition, architecturally they're very important. So let's sort of unpack some of the parts of the building which we have. The most sort of, I guess, known portion of it and best preserved is this small octagonal building which contains the samad or samadhi in Hindi, you would say, i.e. is the buried remains, buried post-cremation remains of Baba Bikrama Singh, and which now is the plot of this town where Prakash is done of Guru Granth Sahib. Internally and part externally, it is covered in some of the most fascinating wall paintings which survive to date. And I had the pleasure of going there a number of times, photographing and videoing parts of the Asthan. When I began to share them with you, some of the sort of particular images and designs which you saw, what did they trigger in you?
It is fascinating because I think most people who have been to Amritsar may have seen the Janam Sakhi paintings at Baba Tal, which are obviously very figurative and contain a lot of images of people, Guru Nanak Dev Ji, the whole life story. But this probably represents one of the best examples of other themes of figures that I've seen outside of that. And there aren't that many left due to time and neglect, and a lot of the good examples were left over the border in partition. What you have in the main Samad, so besides the paintings that we've discussed in depth of Baba Sahib Singh, is we have a wonderful depiction of the 10 Guru Sahibs. We have probably one of the only depictions of a taus, which is the peacock-shaped instrument that is often attributed to Guru Har Gobind for its construction. Very pertinent in Kirtan before the advent of the German-made harmonium, one of the principal instruments used. And it's beautifully depicted, and actually we can put in the video, there's an example of a taus that the V&A has from Punjab that looks very, very similar in its shape and its colouring, because peacocks are generally blue in colour. So this taus is coloured
painted,
blue,
yeah.
because the
Sorry, you said Guru Har Gobind. Did you mean Guru Gobind Singh or Guru Har Gobind?
there's some dispute.
Is there?
Yeah,
Okay.
so just like the Saranda, a lot of schools attribute it to Guru Har Gobind, some to Guru Gobind Singh Ji.
Okay.
It kind of doesn't matter.
Okay, no,
Yeah,
no,
as in, yeah. So I've heard it both ways.
There's
Yeah.
a thing about the Matakte Taus of
Yeah.
the Mughal Durbar,
That's
and how
right. Yeah.
this Taus is going to be.
I think most people might say Guru Gobind Singh Ji, but I've heard it from both. Even though the Saranda, there's some dispute over whether it's Guru Amar Das or Guru Arjan. But the main is that these instruments were really rooted in the Sikh musical tradition. Yes, and alongside the Taus is a Saranda. Okay. Same instrument that Baba Sahib Singh Ji used to play. So I've seen the Saranda depicted in a couple of other frescoes, but the taus I've never seen depicted. And so it's really beautiful to see, because it gives us a huge idea of how the instrument was originally made. We have specimens that look exactly like it, and the colouring, and obviously the taus means peacock in Farsi. So the fact that it's blue in colour would echo that, what it's trying to imitate.
And with the detail of the paintings, I mean, we talked about it before, like to the extent that Baba Bir Singh's like skin markings are shown. Like similarly in these wall paintings, they're really not generic figures.
No.
They're highly individualized, very, very specific. Even, I mean, only a tiny proportion are labelled.
Yeah.
But
Most
outside
of
of
them are named, right? Yeah. So they're
outside of the labelled ones, the large mass of sort of unlabelled figures, they're still all individuals.
Yes.
They're not generic figures. So the kirtanis themselves, I mean, the instruments, you know, they are. There's details in there like the number of like strings in the taus.
Yeah.
How the one who's playing the jodi has clearly got shiahi on only one side, which suggests the other side has got atta. Therefore, it's like it's not a tabla.
Like a
It's more like a jodi pakavaj type of instrument. The saranda, perhaps I've looked at in less detail, but the taus, certainly there's things to like look for there. But there's some sort of like ongoing like research that needs to be done on the actual figures of the ragis, because they're not generic figures either. There's definitely like an individual who's like leading the jatha. And what's lovely about the Asthans is like there's this sort of tendency to have I think sometimes two versions of the same painting, or sort of interpretations of it within the same thing. So you mentioned that the one which is Baba Sahib Singh with both their spiritual and like biological family with them is on the outside, but then a slightly different version is on the inside with a few more different figures there. Same thing with this Kirtani one. There's the one where they're playing to Guru Amar Das, and then there's like one that's switched around a little bit where they're playing to a figure who unlabeled but looks like Baba Shri Chand, most probably, in which like the instruments are switched around, and there's a tanpura which is there instead. So amazing details.
And the state of preservation, even when you look at the chat of the dome inside the Samad, it has the exact same floral painting that you would find in the Darbar Sahib on the upper level. It's the exact same school. But and Jasdip's already mentioned, but what is really fascinating is that this building has not been retouched. So it remains as it was. And I'll come on to why that's important in a second. The other two discoveries I made about this Asthan when we were looking at it in detail, it has two paintings that are almost carbon copies of what was present in the original Akal Takht before the destruction in the 80s. One is of Guru Har Gobind in that wide Jonkara pose.
Wide Jonkara or like kind of Virasati type of
Virasati, it's difficult to see, but it's a wide pose. And because again it speaks to Guru Har Gobind's large stature historically. We'll show this in the video. And then another one is of Bhagat Kabir with Mata Loiji, and they're with a loom because they were a weaver. And we have records
again found twice.
Found twice
on the outside, so significant enough Bhagat Kabir to be found on the outside, but also on the inside, and it's just switched around. And one of them is a lovely one because it shows them with their loom, with little sort of like chickens and mataloi, and also like some Kirtanis playing Kirtan.
So when we reflect upon this, because I think about this a bit sentimentally, what was lost when the Akal Takht, the big building, came down, all the fresco work was there. We have some documentation and we have photographic evidence of those two frescoes, and we can directly compare to here, and we see almost pristine versions. So suddenly what was once lost is sitting around the corner in Basti Ram, right? Because it's not far from Darbar Sahib. We're talking a 5-minute walk or something like that.
You said carbon copy, maybe like, a transfer copy or
yeah,
like,
you know what I mean.
But what I mean is that like, it's not just a phrase.
Yeah.
They may be actual like copies.
It might be
actually,
the same school.
And an artist's hand may have like been doing both things or drawing upon the same sort of like sort of original for it.
And what that means then is an opportunity to do study in a way that's never been done before. And what's been really lovely between this recording and our previous one, it's been about a month. We had a meeting with Gurmeet Rai, who's the lead conservation architect, but also Maninder Gill, who is a expert in wall paintings, to discuss how we're going to save these. So at the minute, the way it stands is usually what would happen is these frescoes are painted on wet plaster that's applied, and then as it dries, it bakes into the plaster. But what happens over time is the layers become separate. And so what you see here is that the outer layer is separating from the inner layers.
Yeah, so there's complex things going on. So like, the better preserved portion, I would say in the octagonal sort of building, part of the reason it's well preserved is because it has a double dome, which is like a common sort of structure. This double dome, which is an internal dome, which is the one which has got the paintings on the inside of it. But then there's this hollow space, which rises much higher, and then there's a dome on top of that. So it hasn't had like ingress of water from the top. What it does have though is like issues from the base, basically, because up to like about waist height, the paintings which go downwards, they've been at some point have been painted over with white because they've been damaged. This is an important sort of thing to understand, and it may be connected somehow because there's like a later concrete like courtyard level that's been put in, which somehow has interfered with the way moisture's been allowed to escape. So the key thing with all these sort of buildings is like the way they interact with the moisture. They are, in their original sort of like format, it's supposed to be a sort of a sustainable exchange of moisture where it's allowed to escape. Where it doesn't escape, it causes like decay of the layers of plaster, process which they call it pulverization, where like what is like a solid becomes powder, and therefore like the outer layer of paint is unsupported underneath. And so these are really important things to consider. So, when people sometimes may see, kind of dramatic or emotive images of an Asthan which had paintings, and after they've been lost, like why has it happened? And one of the things to try to really get across is that it's difficult, basically.
Of course, yeah.
It's difficult. An ordinary person, when faced with like sort of this sort of condition, would think, this cannot survive, just demolish it. But we're working with wonderful experts like Maninder Gill and his team who are devoting their entire mental energy to think of the different solutions for this, and which there are. And from my own sort of like understanding of manuscript book conservation, Bodhisattva conservation, it's very common. Someone will say, you cannot bring this back together. And then we show them that it's possible to do in this sort of way. So there are methods, and Maninder's team are working on this. The first sort of phase, which is really essential, is that how to describe the additional buildings apart from the octagonal one also contain many wall paintings, but they are the ones which are in the most fragile state because the roof basically over the last decades, but especially the last few years, has completely allowed like rainwater to come in.
I think like it's what you're highlighting is in any, particularly in a building with frescoes like that, but it's like a multi-pronged approach with regards to an element of it is conservation, an element of it is restoration, like can we restore something, can we put something back? But then there's also this kind of this philosophical element, which is actually everything is decaying and dying, and how much of it can be slowed down, like it may not be able to be stopped. but can we slow down the process? And in the meantime, how do we document?
I like the fact that you're looking at this, because I mean I've had this conversation with others who sort of sometimes question, like, you know, why go down this path of Sambhal? I like to use the Punjabi word of care. Is why not? You know, if Sikh tradition is really about the how can you say, the spiritual world, who cares about these material structures? Let them decay. It's all about the spiritual side. But actually, if you think about it deeply, we need material and metaphysical things to exist.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it?
It's the Raj Jog, it's the Miri Piri. We need these to exist, because they feed the Atma as well.
I agree, and the point being is, where people are coming with that approach is then they're taking the ascetic approach, aren't they? And Maharaj was all about being detached whilst being in the world. So you have to maintain the world. You have to maintain it, otherwise how can you be in it?
None of us here are going to last forever. Yet we want to prolong our life.
That's right.
Still try to be healthy.
Exactly.
But the other thing I like to point out on this issue is sometimes we have to examine our motivations. If someone was to say, Darbar Sahib no chaddo, if we take that thinking to its extreme conclusion, then whitewash the frescoes in Darbar Sahib. You know, that's where it leads. Why have you maintained that one place?
There's neglect as one form of allowing kind of this material heritage to disappear and crumble away. But then there's active destruction.
Yeah.
That's something completely different, and that active destruction can be out of ignorance, but also it can be coming from a place which is more sinister.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're looking at this neglect aspect and thinking about how kind of generally that's kind of driven by ignorance, a lack of appreciation, probably lack of funding, but there is an education.
As part of this sort of, I guess, campaign you can call it, or movement to fundraise for this Asthan and other Asthans as well, the biggest thing that's sort of, or one of the things that's coming across is that it's not just like the physical thing, it's also the set of ideas, designs, traditions. So just ourselves, in researching these paintings, are now learning more about these techniques that were used, these artistic styles. We're trying to hopefully bring in actual painters and experts to bring their insight and start to look at these paintings and hopefully help inform their practice as well.
And it's interesting, because like emotionally, so just a very small anecdote, my grandfather's brother was a very good carpenter. And in my cousin Chacha's house, he had built all the window frames out of wood. And they're still standing now. And when we go there, we look at it and we think, emotionally, fine, you might call it more, but emotionally you look at that and you think, wow, that was the manifestation of my ancestors' knowledge. And I should learn from that. I should nurture it, and I should try and also imbibe it myself so that it passes forward, right? This is nothing more but than an extension of that, reaching back even further into the past. Because the thing is now, what this opportunity, and I can't really stress this enough, because Maninder Gill and his team are, in the next month or so, going to do a very extensive 2-week examination of these frescoes, which is going to include chemical analysis of what minerals were used to paint, how were they painted. It's going to give us information about the Sikh school of painting that hitherto has not been documented. And suddenly, just like, so I try to do Rag Kirtan, and there's a big movement now about trying to go back to the original form, or the more authentic form of Kirtan before other instruments came in, or at least to try and bring that back so it's not disappearing entirely. And this very much is in the same vein. And that's, I think, how people need to look at it.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of knowledge sort of coming from that, which we could probably do some other discussions to share with viewers, is that you need these sort of like these sort of well springs to survive, basically. They may not be like, you may not be able to sort of use them in the same way as another sort of modern built Gurdwara, but through visiting them you can draw upon that source of memory. And I remember when talking to this with Baba Sahib Singh Bedi, who is the custodian of the Asthan, and they went through sort of many different phases of thinking, let's do something or not. Some people were suggesting let's knock this bit down and change it. And being very sort of cautious and sort of philosophical, they said no, let's wait. This isn't the right thing to do just yet, because they had this sort of feeling that some of these bricks in this Asthan, we don't know what bhavana, you can say emotion, they were laid down by. It connects really with, I guess, the service of Baba Bir Singh to Baba Sahib Singh. How there are anecdotes which we can research more and share, and other sort of discussions about how they were involved in physically building an Asthan, which was a sort of expression of their devotion, which it goes back to the Sakhi of Guru Ramdas.
Guru Ramdas Ji, yeah. I think what I'd like to sort of say to the Sangat now is, obviously all of these efforts are going to need support from the Sangat, and everything comes with a price tag. So as a charity, we need support to really fuel this research. And really, these projects are almost like key projects to really show how far you can go to save a building that looks like it's on the brink of its demise, and in a way we want that education to go out in the Sangat, that things that you think are gone beyond repair actually can be salvaged and salvaged well, and out of them we can really learn something, and which can tell us more about ourselves and where we've come from, and also inspire future generations of creativity, which seems to have been so pertinent to our ancestors.
And for people who ask, if I donate towards this cause, which we really do need, I mean, this is honestly the truth is that there is I guess Sikh society or Sikh Samaj, we do have funds for this sort of thing. We just need people sort of in their minds think, this is the thing I want to donate towards. Anyhow, if you did donate towards this sort of cause, what would you get out of it? I mean, yes, but we're offering sort of a package of membership where you get prints given every year, which is that's a tangible thing which you will get. But aside from that, I always think that one thing you will get is that the next time or the first time you decide to go to Punjab and visit historic Asthans, if there are historic Asthans which have more of their authentic past, you can say, surviving, you will have a more fulfilling time on your trip.
And I just wanted to bring it back as well to you, Davinder, because and I'm really grateful that you've taken another second trip to come and spend for us to fill this second part. Sometimes I look at this and I think, that sense of awe that I feel in your exhibition when I look at all those things curated together and the story that it's telling, and the yadgari that it's, for a certain period of time whilst this exhibition has been on, I kind of feel like it's an Asthan in the sense that it's memory preservation, and your exhibition along with this Gurdwara conservation has fueled so much sort of self-discovery in myself, and even this discussion has brought out so many things that I hadn't even looked at before. And I'm always thinking, when I go to the Baba Bir Singh Ji's Asthan, to see something permanent in context is like an extension of that feeling that you could permanently be there, or at least for a time be there for us to enjoy. And I think the funny thing is, each and every one of us Sikhs, especially sat outside in Western countries, knows that feeling, right? Because most of us go on holiday and we go to, we're sitting in this library, right? Our first reaction when we all walked in, it's not even that old, but it's like, wow, right? I've been to the Vatican. My first impression was just speechless. And to be able to do that in an Asthan that's related to our people, to our tradition, to our history, I'm sort of dumbfounded. I'm kind of I really want to see that happen, and I'd like to see our community make it happen. To tap into that. But if you're looking for that feeling in other cultures, why not look at it in your own, right? Why does it become funny when you start to think about your own culture? I'm like, if you get that happy over seeing old Colosseums in Rome and that, this is way beyond that, right? It's way beyond that.
I think in the works of art that we looked at from the very beginning, and when we think about the time that we're in now, whether it's saving these works of art when they randomly appear, whether it's the time periods that are being depicted in those works of art, or whether it's this Asthan, this building, which is kind of crying out or calling out. It's almost the thread that links all of it is almost like bring on the precipice, like we're right at the edge in the moment to make a very vital decision. You know, do you buy that? You know, do you preserve that? You know, do you speak about that? Do you record that? Do you take that picture now? Like we are actually in the moment, and I think that's really crucial. I think for us to understand, with regards to the preservation of all of this heritage, like we won't be able to look back and regain this moment. You know,
that's so true. That's so true. I mean, to be honest, these buildings, if they're left, they probably won't survive another 10 years. They're at, like you say, they're at the precipice of almost a point of no return, really. And even when you entered the collecting market, and even when you put on this exhibition, you will have faced that moment many, many times. Should I buy this? Should I proceed with this exhibition? If I don't do it now, it may never happen. And even the way you've proceeded with the Ranjit Singh exhibition now, against quite a heavy odds, really, in terms of being able to put it on financially, effort-wise, and with support, you kind of think, if I don't take the leap, it will never happen.
It's as what people say, you know, it's the inaction that you regret. You never regret the action.
No.
You know, that will always be fine. It's the inaction that you regret. So I think all of us will be urged to support you.
So on that note, we'll tie things off. So there's more information about this Asthan and other Asthans that we're fundraising for on our website. We're on social media. Please follow us, and hopefully there'll be forthcoming videos with other sort of wonderful people like Davinder Singh, where we carry on discussing. And I know, I mean, there are, even just this one topic, there are countless.
We could have gone on for hours. We have already.
Yeah, but things which haven't been fully turned over yet. So, but thank you for all.
Yeah, and just to say one last thing. Davinder's exhibition, the Ranjit Singh exhibition, is on to October 20th, is that right?
That's right.
It's on at the Wallace Museum in London. Closest station is Bond Street.
That's right.
So you've got limited time now before you can continue to have a look at these wonderful objects, including the paintings that we've discussed in these conversations. So we've seen it, and it's it is breathtaking. So thank you, Davinder, for the exhibition. Thank you for this conversation, and best of luck with everything going forward.
Thank you very much. No, it's been a privilege and an honour. Thank you very much for inviting me to have this wonderful, valuable, very valuable conversation with you, and personally just wishing you all the best with this work, which is, hopefully it's going to be immeasurably successful and is extremely important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ.